Morning, folks. First of all, let me congratulate you on yesterday. While it may seem chaotic at the end, we're trying to figure out what we're doing here. That was the most efficient, well-timed meeting we've ever had in my history of attending this august body. So thank you all for your focus and helping us do all this. Just to remind everybody, trying to do a couple things at once here. We have a long-term strategic arc we've talked about, but trying to do some housekeeping in advance of the administration's transition and what we can do to impact that. So tactically, there are things near, but there may not be the most important thing in the long term, but we got to get done because we got to be positioned. And I don't know if anybody saw, but they named a new NASA administrator last night. Jacob Isaacson, I got the name right, who commanded 2 civilian space flights with a Dragon vehicle, and is apparently a close ally of Elon Musk. So that presents both threats and opportunity, as it always does when there's a political transition. Be thinking about that and how best to have that conversation when the time comes. So with that, let me go to JJ and see if there are any comments. Administrator.
Well, I would say thank you, Admiral, for sharing that great news. That's worthy of applause. And again, thank you very much. Second day of our open Federal Advisory Committee Act Day. Deliberations are open to the public. I think we made a lot of progress yesterday, and today is more your day. Today is really bringing it all together and deciding if we have any recommendations, how we want to incorporate them into any form of transition paper, and then really next steps. And we'll perhaps talk a little bit more about a spring or summer meeting as we close the day up. So thank you.
So let's, Dana, let's start with you this morning. You want to give us an update on what transpired since yesterday and where we're at?
Yes, sir. I think we've focused in on version 6. Received a couple comments, somewhat substantive, number of style issues, but I think that my recommendation is, one, we open the floor for discussion right now, but barring any substantive objections, we provide version 6 to you as a draft, along with any other editorials that come in, and we make the draft a matter of the record, asking you to smooth, because you're going to be signing it and finalize and forward. But I don't think there are any substantive objections or changes. I think we're at consensus on the overall tone, tenor, and messaging on version 6.
DJ, that keep us aligned with FACA that way?
Yeah, but I think probably the most practical thing to do is actually have the paper up.
Okay, it should be available. Could you put it up, please? Or at least it was asked for that. There we go. So just going through it slowly, we had I highlighted the places where we had significant or notable, I should say, changes. Again, some of this is style, emphasis, and so forth. I think
you might work on that title a little bit. It does not trip easily across the tongue.
Okay.
How about PNT challenges require attention? Just leave it at that.
Okay.
PNT challenges require attention.
Okay. Yep.
Don't have to change it right now. That's all right.
Yep. I don't think that's objectionable. Let's see. You want to keep scrolling down. We added, as you saw, at Logan's suggestion, we added a graphic to catch the eye, a little bit of a hook. Rephrase the public safety bit. Again, everybody should have seen that in version 6. A little bit more in economic security, outlining a little bit more detail of what's impacted in terms of economic security. And keep going down. Shortened up the global standing great power competition piece into 2 subparagraphs. More editorial, had the piece in the box, which as a call out for the public-private roles, because we know that's has been a focus of the government, especially at OMB, and it's certainly we think would be a point of interest for the incoming administration. And down, down, down. And so the only, we did have some conflicting thoughts on additional recommendations. The general consensus seemed to be that if we even bulletized additional recommendations in the main body, it would distract from the primary recommendation. And then the attachment requires some work, especially if we're going to be adding things in from today. And we've got some suggestions on how to, if you want to scroll on to the next page, on how to better describe these things. But essentially, these are things that we've already made recommendations on. Presumably, we might get one or two more recommendations from this meeting that we can add on here. But as I say, I think we're pretty close to being done. And we can administratively handle additional tweaking, modifying the title and so forth as you see fit. Could you scroll back up to the recommendation, please? Down. Yep. A little bit more. One more. Yeah. So we tried to tighten that up a little bit. It might be a little wordy. Might be able to be a little bit more hard hitting, but we think that at least captures the substance of the recommendation, which I will read, and I hate reading slides to people, but just for the record, I will read. The new administration must ensure America has the resilient PNT we need. This will require evaluating the current leadership structure and decision-making process and ensuring adequate funding for the protection, augmentation, and toughening of both military and civil capabilities.
Yeah, my only comment there would be replace leadership with governance. I don't know if there's a hard feeling one way or the other. I can leave it. I'm okay with that.
Okay. Yes, sir.
PTA deliberately?
I wasn't as awake as I might have been this morning when I was finalizing this, so I think that's a good change. I think it's good to switch it back because I just noticed it also.
Okay. The slightly more substantive, if you called it disruptions, I'd at least put in parentheses, e.g. jamming and spoofing, because disruption, someone might think, well, they're going to run pickets outside Colorado Springs, OCX or something, and
okay.
That I don't think is what you intended.
Okay.
Dana, under additional recommendations, you have the current National Space-Based Positioning Navigations. Current sounds like we're leading with our chin.
Oh, okay, yeah. Eliminate current, yeah. So the thought there was that, we're renewed every 2 years, and how far back do you go in terms of recommendations? But yeah, I got it. Works for me. So
just back on the, sorry, Matt.
Yes.
Back on the main recommendation, given we're a civil board, should we put civil in military rather than military and civil?
Okay. PTA in the right order. Okay. So, sir, I think the evidence would show that we're down to non-substantive editorial things. So.
Why was the National Guard singled out? It's everybody.
Largest group of the nation's first responders, civil, military.
I wouldn't even think that's true.
No. Okay.
I think you can leave it, that's fine. We had 80,000 people around New Orleans during Katrina. The National Guard was probably about 10,000. So.
Right, for any particular incident, but, as a standing force, yes, sir. Okay.
Anything else? Okay.
Okay, so I will make some of these corrections, forward to you with a draft on it for the record, with request that you finalize it so you're happy to sign it, and we'll go off to.
Good.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I have one other nit. When you list something like threats include, I expect the lead sentence to be a sort of a descriptor of the threat. It's an editorial and you may not want to change anything, but in the public safety case, it absolutely is that way. But the economic security, I just don't know. It's a matter of style, but yeah. Threats affect the following or something.
Anything else? Okay, thanks. Good on that.
Take a vote.
Any opposed? Carries. How's that?
Yeah. I just want, it's a matter of record that we all agree on.
Were we able to reconcile the wording on a recommendation for the NGS NOAA proposal? Did you have that, Frank?
Yeah, I shared an email with you three gentlemen, and maybe we should shall I share with Sarah? We can put it up on the screen.
Why don't you just make sure, because General Hamill had some comments on it.
Jade, did you want to speak to yours while,
Why not? I can, you want to read it or I can read it, Frank?
Sounds much better if you read it, please.
Thank you, Frank. PNTAB recommendation for HARS NGS. The Space-Based PNT Advisory Board supports NOAA and NASA with appropriate funding stand up the HARS service, as described in HARS white paper and NGS 3 Things memo, which we can append. NOAA has the operational expertise and hardened systems to deliver the system. NOAA and NASA are committed to a partnership to deliver this technology. NGS should develop a proposed program of record that includes system description definition, key performance requirements, overall systems architecture, and operations concept, required staffing, facility sustaining support, and required funding, both investment and continuing ops, and sustainment, and the agencies that they will work with and cooperate with to build and run the HARS. The proposed program should be approved by appropriate levels in NOAA and the Department of Commerce. And it says attachment on gps.gov, HARS white paper, and the NGS 3 Things memo. General Hamill, you happy with it?
No,
Okay.
that,
I didn't ask you. Go ahead.
I just think someone should massage that first sentence.
How?
Well, supports NOAA and NASA with appropriate funding. What we're supporting is the funding to NOAA and NASA.
How about we just say subject to appropriate funding?
I'll go you one better.
Yeah.
Why don't we just turn it over to someone to try to make certain the wording is okay?
I mean,
You understand?
Yeah, no, I understand. And when you read it, as I heard it read out loud, I was like, oh, that sounds funny. But I think what the intent is, we'd like to support
No,
that
the
they
intent
get
is
funding.
great.
We'd like them to get funding, and we're proposing they get funding, right?
yeah, so all you have to say is supports NOAA and NASA, subject to, and then list them.
Or being funded or something.
But I feel like we want to say we recommend that they get funding. Can we do that? Or
I think you can. But
subject to appropriate funding, which we recommend and encourage, or something like that.
Okay, I'll work with Frank. I'll find
Yeah,
you're
and,
okay with that.
and Mike.
I'm
too,
okay
that's
with that.
Okay.
He's become the godfather of this. Thanks.
All right. Okay. So, Sarah, I emailed to you. Okay. All right. Yes. Okay, so this is our recommendation and our findings. I've talked about it yesterday during the meeting, and we brought out the background here because we had made the recommendation earlier. There was a response from the ESG, and they talked about they had some ongoing effort and working with different departments, different government agencies, and we felt those efforts, they were good, but they are still very narrowly focused, and we believe that it needs to be a larger scale and also on a broader PNT topic areas. So anyway, we felt that if you wanted to go into universities changing the system and develop a new curriculum or develop new tracks, that would be uphill battle. So recognize that there is already a large non-PNT technical communities there from different sectors. So our subcommittee think a more cost-effective and implementable approach would be doing training programs. So specifically, the two recommendations we make are, the first one is the ESG. We asked during our last meeting for ESG to work with the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on a study to gather the evidence for the need for PNT research, education, training, and required technologies, but also in comparison with related international activities to develop a roadmap for future PNT skilled workforce. And we feel that this recommendation that we made last time, we haven't had any response yet. We think this is important because only when we have a survey, a study understanding, the need, a more quantitative understanding, based on that, then we could develop a more concrete recommendation about, how large a scale of program we should develop. So that's the first recommendation we'd like to repeat it here. The second recommendation was a new recommendation we made is that the U.S. government should work with industry and academia to establish U.S. national PNT workforce training programs. But the scales, funding levels, and implementation models of these training programs that should be determined based on the findings from the first recommended study. So that's the two items we'd like to recommend.
Okay, I had a couple of questions.
Yes.
I'm personally good to go with this. Do you have a point of contact? Do you know who you would contact in the national academies yet?
Actually, I am going to Washington, D.C. next week. There is a panel there with the National Academy of Science, Engineering, Medicine, and I will formally bring it up to them.
Okay, if you want, we can do this offline. Marcia McNutt is the president, CEO, whatever it is, of the National Academies.
Okay.
She's former director of the U.S. Geological Survey, and she led the scientific team that supported me for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Okay,
I'm happy to reach out and talk to her because they will have to apply resources if they're going to do it. And I'm happy to have that discussion with you offline if you like. And on the government side, I would think the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency Foundation would be significantly interested in this, and I'm happy to work offline with you on that as well.
I'll get the names from you.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
On the 16th of December, NASEM is hosting a working group meeting there and to discuss this issue. So I'll be there, but I would love to get the name from you. Names. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Jade, I had a couple of comments. Reasons for recommendation. You start with perception, but the rest of the paragraph appears to be facts. So maybe just rather than there is a perception, just somehow. But the rest of the paragraph seems to be statements of facts.
So the reason we struggled with this, because the first recommendation is having the concrete evidence, numbers. We don't have that. So at this point, if we say there's indication, but those are all about, more of a hearsay. We've talked to industry, we've heard from people, but we don't have a reference to point to. So that's why the perception is our perception based on our interactions with people from different, different categories of, people out there from industry and some government agencies when they talk about the lack of personnel with a technical background to lead efforts in this area. But we don't have some written documentations. That's why we use the word perception. I'll be happy to change to something that's better, but we were kind of short of words. But you did, catch that. It's something we struggled with.
Thank you. Over here.
Yeah, Jay, just given the high-level target audience, wondering if NASM should be spelled out, just because it may not be an acronym many people know about.
Thank you. We'll do that. Yeah, I will make that change now. Good point. Yeah.
Any other comments? No other comments? Without objection, carries.
We've got a little bit of time here. And so the question is there interest just to do a quick round the robin, round the table? We are scheduled for a break. We don't necessarily have to do that because we've got a number of presentations scheduled for right after that. So, sir, would you like to just go around or do the presentations?
How about we do this? When we take a 10-minute break, get some more coffee, come back out, and is our UN rep here? If not, we can maybe start the other presentations early, if that's all right with everybody.
Shafa kicks us off. She's right here.
Okay, can we
But
do that?
We're going to take a little break, I think.
Sure, 10 minutes and we'll get started. I don't think anybody object to getting out here early today. Thank you, folks.
You're hanging around for a while, aren't you?
Because tomorrow we're going to fly up to San Fran. Yeah, when I was looking at all
You're not driving.
your recommendations,
Yeah.
I showed the girls, and they go, "No, we saved that for next time when we do make the drive."
Oh. Yeah. Well, the advantage of doing that is Highway 1 maybe. That if you haven't ever driven that section of Highway 1,
Yeah,
it is.
I've met you up at Stanford. I've driven over the years. I've driven.
Highway 1 open? Sorry for my tardiness. I was talking to folks here. So we are reconvened. I think we got just about everybody. Oh, okay. Just for the good order and discipline, there we go. So we're going to go ahead and we're accelerating. I appreciate everybody's cooperation here this morning, and hope I don't slaughter this name. Shafa Gadamova? Did I get that right? Yes. All right. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. So I will be today talking about the outcome of the ICD 18th meeting, which happened recently in October. All right, to begin with, this is just a chart which shows our membership, no changes there, and our key responsibilities. It still shows as it is today, but many things happened in ICD 18th meeting, and that will be changed later on. So as I said, ICD 18 meetings took place in Wellington in October, and it was hosted by New Zealand and Australia. The work carried out of the work plan of ICD by these 4 working groups, which worked also, they're working throughout the year, but the main work carried out at the meeting, annual meeting of ICD. And I will now move to the recommendations made by all these working groups. So to begin with is Working Group S, and their recommendation is related to emerging low Earth orbit PNT workshops. The working group already conducted 2 workshops which were focused on emerging LEO PNT systems in 2023 and 2024. And these workshops aimed at better understanding what systems are being developed and how they might interact with GNSS. The recommendations related to the fact that we need more workshops focused on this topic, and this will be supported by the working group itself, including compatibility and interoperability matters to be considered at that workshop. This is another recommendations related to the number of other workshops which are highlighted in their work plan. And these workshops related to timing interoperability, PPT interoperability, IDMA and performance standards, interference detection and mitigation, and as I said earlier, LEO PNT compatibility and interoperability. So based on the work which this working group is carrying out, the decision was made to update their work plan, taking into account new topics or coming in. So, and that will include these new 4 topics to be reflected in their work plan so that it's discussed regularly. The details of this work will be described in the work plan, and it's related to PPP interoperability, civil signal authentication, LEO PNT compatibility and interoperability, and lunar PNT compatibility. The following recommendation is the recommendation of the Working Group B on ionospheric impacts on GNSS and international collaboration to meet current and future solar activity period challenges. As you all know, the ionosphere is one of the key factors which affecting the performance all of navigation satellite systems. And that's why ICG encourages international GNSS ionosphere space weather communities, including ICD members, to work together by conducting a workshop aimed at discussing the ionospheric impacts on GNSS and joint actions to be undertaken to mitigate the ionospheric impact on GNSS during current and future solar activity period through international collaborations. The following recommendation, also Working Group B, is on participation in the joint ICD and RAG multilateral cislunar PNT workshop. The goal of this workshop is to provide an open international coordination forum for lunar PNT services providers, including GNSS providers, and to foster interoperable, compatible, and available lunar PNT systems for the future. The lessons learned from GNSS community will be needed to ensure that compatibility and interoperability between GNSS and lunar PNT systems and services. Coordination is needed on these topics of lunar spectrum management, common lunar reference frames, and lunar time systems, and will be essential. So to look into all these matters, the recommendation is made to have this workshop on cislunar PNT, which will be held in February in Vienna at the Vienna International Center. Below you see the link to the website of this workshop, and also if you are interested, it's still, registration is still open, I think until 9th of December. So what the goal of this workshop is to provide an open international coordination forum to foster interoperable, compatible, and available lunar PNT system of the future. The focus of this first workshop will be on lunar system and services planned and under development, spectrum compatibility, lunar reference systems, and time systems, as well as aspects and models for international governance, lessons learned from the Earth-based GNSS community, and driving needs from the user segment. The main objectives of the workshop is to outline the scope, depth, and use cases, status of lunar PNT systems being developed, identify lessons learned from the GNSS community that's applicable to lunar PNT service providers and users, foster advancement in interoperability, compatibility, and availability between these systems. Propose recommendations that may be taken up by the lunar PNT community. Another recommendation of this working group is to establish a new working group, which will be on lunar, and it's with abbreviation Working Group L. So this is based on the working group's subgroup work plan, which was formed back in 2021 to understand how GNSS space service volume could be used in content with future lunar PNT systems to support lunar operations. Since that time, through the active execution of their work plan, this subgroup has gained significant insights to the scope of Dutch PNT systems and use cases which are under development, and the role of GNSS, how the GNSS will serve in lunar PNT, particularly in the vehicles transit between the Earth and Moon. So that's why the establishment of this working group was supported by ICG, and this is highlights of the work of this working group. Serve as a mechanism to better understand, again, the scope, depth, and users and status of lunar systems which are being developed, propose recommendations which will be taken by the international lunar PNT community, and facilitate development of interoperable, compatible, and available lunar PNT. So here is the slide which shows the scope of the working group, the tasks which will be accomplished from now on. These tasks are related to lunar PNT systems, lunar PNT signal compatibility, as well as lunar PNT applications, flight experiments, reference frames, time systems, and international cooperation models. Right, this slide is the recommendation of the Working Group D, and it's related to publication of a policy brief on the uses of GNSS and disaster risk reduction. The task force on application of GNSS for disaster risk reduction was the one to deal with that and explore how GNSS technology can enhance disaster risk reduction strategies and bolster natural hazard early warning systems. Task force currently working on the 4 GNSS techniques, which have broad applications, and they're related to earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, and solar storms. This is the techniques described here, and the recommendation is to publish the policy brief, which will come out basically soon. This is just highlight of what the working group see, which is led by our Office on Information Dissemination Capacity Building, the activities which were carried out throughout this year. And the last one still will happen next week in Hanoi, in Vietnam, on GNSS. Well, with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Questions? Oh, yes, Larry.
Yeah, just a question. Obviously, you're trying to set some standards ultimately for, I think, for comm and nav in the lunar space. You have NASA already starting to work and develop some of those standards, especially in the comm arena. You have Lockheed, which has spun out a company called Crescent, which is wanting to provide comm and nav services in the lunar space. So, I mean, where do we end up? I mean, we have ITU here on Earth-based systems. Is the ultimate goal to create something like ITU? Are you already behind the power curve since, you know, there's these systems that are starting to be developed and some standards by NASA? So where do you see this going, and how do we ultimately get our hands around standardizing these capabilities and even potentially approving them just like we do here around the Earth?
Larry, I'm gonna jump in and help Jaffa because I helped set the ICG up with her 18 years ago. So some of the things she talked about in terms of the turn towards lunar really were instigated by our team. So I'm the NASA lead to the ICG. And the bottom line is we see just this evolution of interest in taking GNSS and using it in the cislunar domain. And, you know, you can argue that we've seen this before in the aviation field. You had to pay to put GPS on board in airframe. Tim Murphy would be the first one to tell you that. Now you'd have to pay not to have it, right? So GPS, we're finding, is becoming standard on all these space platforms. We know it's not the final or long-term architecture solution until we get some infrastructure out around the moon, but GPS and GNSS together is going to serve as kind of that next decade, you know, progress. So the ICG is a coordinating body. It's not a standard-setting body like the ITU would be. And so what we've been doing is coordinating with the IOAG, Interagency Operations Advisory Group, and that also is connected to CCSDS, acronym SOUP, Consultative Committee on Space Data Systems. We're trying to make sure that if you go to a meeting, you see all these JAXA reps from Japan, they're here, and then they're here. Let's make sure that we're all talking to each other. So we really have to thank Shafa and her leadership for allowing us to bring in some of our interoperability issues to make sure that we can all speak the same language. And as an example, you know, we have a multi-GNSS space service volume booklet. What does that mean? Well, GPS had a space service volume. So, you know, going out to GEO, we understood the performance characteristics, and then we actually got every other service provider, including the regionals, India and Japan as examples, to also develop a space service volume. And so now you could have a platform with a multi-GNSS, you know, chip that's processing signals from all these systems, because we need that availability, because, you know, it's very tough to process, right? So anyways, I think that we've made a lot of progress. All the stuff that she talked about lunar really just happened at our last October meeting. So hopefully that's all helpful. A little verbose, but I think important.
I think just JJ might answer this one as well. Just trying to, given our obsession with governance, my impression has been IOAG has been leading it, lunar PNT stuff, and the ICG was to bring in the GNSS perspective and make sure there's coordination. This joint activity, is it still kind of led by IOAG, or is it now a joint governance, or how's it working?
You're asking the right person, because brought into the ICG a request that the IOAG become a formal observer to the UN. And it took me a couple years because, you know, it's just like any UN process where sometimes it takes a couple of times. So I served as liaison. All the space agencies voted me to be the spokesperson. So I was going back and forth doing presentations between IOAG and ICG, mirroring the people up. When I took on my other White House hat for the other advisory group, it was too much. So Joel Parker now serves as the liaison. So I would say that IOAG really was not as involved, especially in the GNSS domain, until we started documenting for them all the missions that were investing in GNSS and why they needed to make sure that this was all coordinated. In the ICG, we all know we have bilats with multiple countries on interoperability. The ICG is the only place where you have all the system providers coming together once a year to ensure full interoperability. It's also a unique vantage point for NASA because we have some constraints on working with China on a bilateral basis. In a multilateral forum, some of those constraints go away. So anyways, we've been able to work the system so that it's as productive as it can be for everyone.
If I may, just a second, basically those two brochures which yesterday Matt showed on SSV, that's two brochures. It took those years to work on them, and that's led to the fact that they now have to be a separate working group. And that working group will be led by United States, ESA, Japan, and China. So this is 4 co-chairs of the workshop, of this working group. They're one of the largest in all the working groups which we have. All right, thank you.
Comments? I kind of had a question, philosophical question. Is there any role for the board in saying anything about the presentation, affirming it, or doing anything that might be supportive? Do we have an opportunity?
Oh, I think, sir, there's definitely an opportunity, and I think that would be most appreciative because it's really all the providers that we heard from 2 yesterday. We'll hear from more in the spring summer meeting, and this kind of sets the stage for that, the importance of that.
Specifically, do we want to say anything about this particular presentation and that we support the direction or anything? That's all I'm saying. We don't have to do anything. I didn't know. Maybe you could gin up some for later on in the day. We can take a look at it. Okay, thanks. Okay, Renato, you ready? You're always ready. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Admiral, for giving me the floor. And ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, while preparing the presentation for today's meeting, I was starting to feel like a journalist because so many things has happened since the last meeting, and I decided to put a couple of novelties and a list of the news that would perhaps attract your attention here. So if you just try to give me the next slide, please. The first of all, I would like to report the accomplishments of the group to which I belong, the researchers that developed the ambient-aware application aligned PNT. We talked about it recently and in the recent meetings, and the idea of the AA squared PNT is actually to allow the PNT process that estimates position, velocity, and time to be aware of the environmental conditions in which the PNT takes place. And as well, the idea is to provide the opportunity of the application of the PNT to be aligned in a sense that the applications may extend their requirements and needs, and the PNT process could be in a sense aligned to the actual requirements of the actual application. We have developed a lot of we have developed a framework for the further research and also for potential deployment, as well as the basic models that can overcome the effects of the major issues that may appear in the PNT, especially related to the space weather and ionospheric conditions. And we are working also on not only the technology development, but also the utilization, new scenarios, case studies, but also the safety, regulatory, and legal challenges of the implementation of the AA² PNT. Because we've learned during this meeting that the application is also the key point to which the PNT further developments should be aligned to. The understanding of the needs of the various classes of the utilizations and the users of the PNT is essential for the success of the PNT as the national infrastructure, as a public goods, and also not only the infrastructure, but also the set of services to be provided to the users. So the next slide, if you please. We have also considered implementation of the statistical learning, machine learning, and artificial intelligence within the PNT. It was also the subject of the presentation given to the ECAS subcommittee, and you have already been informed that we are working on the development of the white paper and assess not only the AR for PNT from the technology perspective, but also from the regulatory, ethical, operational, strategic aspects and the implications which are under consideration. The most important thing is also to address the international aspect of the utilization of the AI, because in the distributed environment, the AI may be deployed in various countries, so it is the challenge to understand and also to regulate how the AI would be employed for the purpose of the PNT. Next slide, please. This means to lead us to a short update or the overview of the recent developments within the Galileo, which Galileo also implements the AI increasingly. So I have listed a quite comprehensive list of the recent developments that has been done since the last meeting of this PNT-AB. So 2 new satellites were added to the Galileo constellation in September 2024. There is also the very successful testing of the Galileo Open Service Navigation Message Authentication Service has been conducted by the European Agency for Spatial Program, EUSPA, and there is expectation that this OSNMA service will be declared operational somewhere in 2025. There are also 17 projects that get funds from the European Union Horizon Europe Third Call, which was set up to fund the research in the space program. Out of 63 submissions, if you are interested who has got it, there is a list, open list, transparent list, so you can see what would be the next topics of the research within the EU. The annual EGNOS and Galileo user satisfaction surveys were conducted, as well as the new EGNOS Safety of Life Service for Aviation Service definition document was released. So in the next slide, please. There was a new Galileo sensor station as part of the network of the world observation of the Galileo update and status was set up in the Bonaire Island in Caribbean. The EUSPA has also issued the Earth Observation and GNSS Market Report 2024, very important document to understand the user needs and the prospects and for the utilization of the Copernicus as well as Galileo and EGNOS. EUSPA has declared the 20th anniversary, so congratulations to them. And there is also the 15th anniversary of the EGNOS Open Service. Galileo has gained market acceptance as well, and there were a list of practical and successful demonstrations of the HAAS in Dakar, Senegal in Africa, but also in some other places. And there is also a recently report of the successful test conducted in Romania of a Galileo emergency warning satellite service, which is also about to be declared very soon. So in the next slide, please. there is an open document you can access freely, and it is available to everyone, with pronunciation and announcement of Galileo, HAS, and OSNMA service, authentication service. There is an information that you can reach about the ability of your GNSS receiver to benefit from those signals and services freely, and regularly updated document you can access at the link provided in this presentation. So in the next slide, there are also some thoughts and information about the governments of Galileo, which is set in a sense in a combination of the European Commission, ESA, and USPA officers, but also with the contractors and the user community, who develop research, of course, first, then develop and operate the Galileo and EGNOS services and system. About the funding for the research, about the funding for the operation, there is a Horizon Europe Space Framework, and also the very transparent procurement. You can get the information about it. There is a link at the bottom of this slide. But it is important to say that USPA works extensively with the users of the Galileo and EGNOS. There is the annual USPA user consultation platform was held in October 2024, getting the inputs for the for the new revision of the Galileo and GNSS user needs and requirements library. And USPA also held the open days in order to get more impact and more information, but more input from the potential users of the satellite services and system. And on the next slide, there is also some information about the other related issues. So ESA has released the Navigation Innovation Support Program Advisory Committee PNT Vision 2035 white paper, a useful document that can tell something about the vision and the motivation to go further into the PNT program. And I will steal this perhaps from Terry's presentation. There is an announcement of the UK Hub for Quantum-Enabled Position, Navigation and Timing, which had the grant of £2.5 million for research in support of PNT technologies. Probably Terry would tell more about that with the recent information very probably released in the UK. And on the next slide, there is, of course, the wide interest among the public about the GNSS, about the reliability and robustness of the GNSS. So Financial Times ran an article on the spectrum exploitation in space and radio interference. You can access it. So if you're interested, there is also very interesting illustrations within this article. And on the next slide, wider acceptance of the GNSS means the communication with the wider classes of the potential and existing users. So I would like to emphasize that the United Nations organized together with the government of Spain a workshop on the GNSS and related space technologies in support of urban sustainability challenges. Another proof that of importance of understanding of the application and users who will utilize the GNSS and similar technologies. There was also a traditional Baška Spatial Information Fusion Forum held in Croatia, in Baška on Kirk Island. I am also proud and delighted that 4 people sitting in this room also attended Baška SIF Forum as invited keynote speakers. I would like to thank them for their contribution, and I believe there was also a wide range of interesting information presented at this event. It should be also emphasized that on the next slide, the wider international community celebrated the International GNSS Day proclaimed by the US Institute of Navigation. We will continue to do so and support this. And finally, with the invitation for the next years on the next slide, for you to consider coming to the next year's Baška Spatial Intelligence Forum to be held again in Baška on Krk Island in Croatia between 21st and 24th September. I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Renato. Questions or comments? Thank you. Terrific job.
Thank you, sir.
I have a quick question, Admiral.
Go ahead.
That briefing and many others contained a lot of links. Do we have access to hard copies or online copies of these materials after the...
It should be posted on gps.gov. You can go there and bring the link up, I would think. JJ?
Yes, sir. I think Jason Kim may have already posted all the briefings that he received. We were working that yesterday.
They are posted.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Renato. You're up, Matt.
Thanks, Sarah. Next slide, please. So I've got a very, very brief presentation today because we heard from Alison yesterday on resilient PNT in Australia, and that covered a lot of the things that are going on. But I would like to just talk a little bit about the fact sheet that she also mentioned. So next slide, please. So this is the fact sheet that the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Centre put out on PNT, and there's a link there for people who want to have a look at it. I was involved, when I was with the Space Agency, I was involved in some of the early development of that. I posted it on LinkedIn, and there was a comment that it was a good job and easy to understand by a guy called Thad Allen, so that's probably a good endorsement. I know also that Home Affairs have been doing assessments of the PNT reliance by particular infrastructure sectors. And there was a report being developed. I know when I left the Space Agency, I haven't had a chance, having been away for the last 6 weeks, to chase that up to see where it's at. But if that report starts to materialise more, I'll make sure I send it out to board members. Next slide, please. And just finish with the plug. We had a meeting I should mention, actually, I've also stepped down as president of GNSS. So Andrew Dempster at the University of New South Wales has taken over. I'll continue to be involved on the committee, etc. We had a meeting last week, and we've decided to continue with our every 2 years idea. So the next IGNSS meeting conference will be in February 26 in Sydney. So if any of you want to escape the northern winter and visit Sydney in our summer, please let me know. Thank you.
You just set a record, Matt. Thank you. Terry. Guess I should say Terry Moore for the record. First and last names.
It's just that's to trip me up, that, isn't it? Good morning, everybody. So a quick update on what's happening in the UK. As you recall, I guess about a year ago now, I actually had something useful to say for the first time, because the UK has actually announced its framework plan. If we get the next slide, please. And I showed this rather overloaded slide from the UK PNT office, but I still include it because it does put everything onto one slide, so I won't go through everything again today. The most important bit is in the bottom right-hand corner. As I've reported previously, this 10-point plan as a framework to establish a future for resilient PNT in the United Kingdom. Now, of course, since this was published on October 2023, we've had a change of government in the UK, as well as here in the US, of course. And so an immediate concern was what will be the response of the new government to this plan, to the PNT office, to all the work we've been doing. And fortunately, 2 weeks ago, the Royal Institute of Navigation hosted its third PNT Leadership Seminar, which we held at the Royal Society in London. That was attended by well over 100 delegates from significant positions within industry, academia, and very fortunately government as well. The opening address to that workshop was given by Lord Valence, Patrick Valence, who is the Minister of Science in the new government. So rather than, and his, the transcript of his speech was published on the UK's government's website the next day, of which I have a printout here. So to avoid being misquoted, I want to quote just one short paragraph from that absolutely directly, as it says on the transcript. I've reviewed the framework since coming into office in July, and I'm pleased to confirm today a commitment to implementing the government policy framework for greater PNT resilience. Now, we couldn't have a more concrete supporting statement than that, so we're delighted to move forwards. So perhaps we could see what's actually happened with these 10 points here, and that's what I want to do in the next couple of slides, is just review the progress over the last year. So the next slide, please. Oh, I'm not. I'm going to talk about this first. I also showed this previously. So this is how it all sort of fits together in terms of those 10-point plan, how it addresses the requirements in terms of PNT resilience, particularly in critical national infrastructure, reliant on the National Timing Centre and the enhancement of that, and then how that feeds in to the provision of PNT through space-based augmentation service, through the ELARAN proposals and other aspects of that. Right down the bottom there, the Ordnance Survey Network feeding into the interference monitoring as well, and I'll say a few things about that in a few moments' time. So I've presented this all in terms of all the different aspects from those 10-point plan, how it fits together in terms of this system of systems approach. So the next slide will now start to review the progress. So these are these are 5 of the 10 points. The remaining 5 will be on the next slide. So first of all, the National PNT Office. This is now fully staffed at the moment, so there are 12 permanent staff working in. This is within the Department of Science, within the UK government. Staff directly employed there. There is funding for this office from across all government departments, including the Ministry of Defence, and there are secondees into this office from the MOD and from the National Physical Laboratory, which is the home of the timing. I've already expressed the ministerial support there. The crisis plan is being developed now, and this is providing this nationwide network for interference monitoring, coming through the Ordnance Surveys network, and that now feeds into the UK Space Operations Centre, and that will be further developed over the coming years. The National Timing Centre I've talked about at the National Physical Laboratory, its funding has already been raised in the last year from its initial £30 million up to now nearly £63 million, and that figure is expected to increase further. The full R&D phase of that is due to be completed by next March, and now they are building the full business case for the complete rollout of the National Timing Centre, and that will be subject to the comprehensive spending review, which will take place early next year. I'll come back to that point a number of times. But the plan is that the National Timing Centre, with all the fibre optic links for distribution and the distribution by satellite, will be operational by 2027, subject to the spending review. I won't say anything about the MOD time. That is, if you like, a parallel activity within a secure environment, so I'll say no more about that, but it is happening. ELARAN, again, has gone through an R&D and consultation phase, very much interacting with the General Lighthouse authorities in particular. That's almost complete now, and again, that is aiming for initial operational capability by January 2027, but again, is subject to the spending review. So all the business cases have been, and technical cases have been written and developed, and that is the ongoing work of the PNT office, but it's all subject to funding being made available. One part of the ELARAN as well is there have been some parallel calls within the MOD, in particular there, one I example, there is some other work that some of you may be familiar with. I think it was mentioned the other day at Roke Manor in terms of the small antennas that have been developed. other aspects of miniaturization of ELA-RAN systems is taking place within MOD work as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the infrastructure resilience, very much directed in our work here, then some of that, the first key action that has been funded by the PNT office and is being coming out through the Royal Institute of Navigation. I'll come back to that a little bit later in this presentation, so I won't say here very much at the moment. And that activity was launched on this workshop we had 2 weeks ago. The RAN has also launched its Resilient PNT website, and that will be enhanced, and that will be paralleled by a new government website for PNT resilience at the gov.uk website. So, but that hasn't been announced yet, but it will be published soon. The two-way satellite time and frequency transfer work is continuing. It was on the bottom of this slide I showed with the framework a little bit earlier on. That has been out to tender and is expected to be awarded very soon, and that will be operational as in terms of the first parts of that, in terms of the demonstrations, by December of next year. There's also ongoing work with miniaturization of clocks, for holdover clocks, and other components as well, and particularly some of the resilient receiver work that's taking place within Kinetic and other bodies as well. The SBAS development, this is not just SBAS in terms of aviation augmentation, but in terms of the precise point positioning aspects of it as well. That is still continuing to be developed, ongoing work there. It's not as mature as the timing aspects and the ELA-RAN aspects yet, but as it's expected to be continuing, and the next years we'll see the continuation of that work. Interesting from what we were just saying earlier about the training aspects that Jade raised just a few moments ago. It's key part again of the UK's framework here in terms of looking at doctoral training centres for training centres specifically for PhD students, but also funding other activities as well. And the UK Space Agency has recently funded work which is also being led by the Royal Institute of Navigation, which is providing training, as we discussed earlier on, specifically in PNT, but also in Earth observation and satellite communications as well. A key part of this is growth, economic growth. That was something that was stressed very significantly, not surprisingly, I guess, by the scienceman and Lord Valance in his speech. And a lot of work will be taking place early in the new year in terms of calls for evidence going out to industry. This is looking at those impact statements and showing how growth is occurring and how growth could be facilitated through resilient PNT. And as Renata just mentioned, aspects of the next generation PNT, there's a whole range of topics within that, but just one thing that has happened within the last year is the establishment of the PNT hub led by the University of Glasgow and includes many universities around the UK. There have been quantum hubs for a number of years now in terms of part of the significant quantum program in the UK, and the Quantum Sensors Hub, led at the University of Birmingham, has been the most significant in our area, but now we have a specific activity focused on quantum PNT. Over the last year, there have also been 3 specific calls for R&D within quantum PNT, and the demonstrator program was just completed, the call within the last month, and the awards will be made very soon. Next slide, please. So I think that leaves it from that, specifically the government's UK PNT office there, and a quick report of the progress over the last year. If I focus now a little bit more on the Royal Institute of Navigation, as you can see, the PNT Advisory Group, as we set up a number of years ago, is there as a key ally to the UK PNT office to work alongside it, to try and facilitate some of the actions coming out. But this is voluntary work within the Royal Institute of Navigation. Some of that work is now funded by the UK PNT office, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. So this is just an update over the last year. You've seen a similar slide at this at previous years. At the top line, coming to the event I've mentioned 2 weeks ago, the leadership seminar. A focus of work is looking at PNT LEO at the moment, and we held an event for that in 2023, a one-day workshop. There will be a new workshop in 2025, reflecting the developments that have taken place. Quantum PNT, not surprisingly, we keep a clean overview of those activities I mentioned, and we'll be holding, again, a one-day workshop in early 2025 to try and bring all the quantum workers together and to engage further with the PNT, the resilient PNT sector. As we heard a little bit earlier on, PNT and AI as well, this has been a discussion topic. We held an online workshop earlier in the year, and that will be leading to a more public face-to-face meeting again through 2025. In 23, we organised for the first time a Defence PNT seminar in the UK. That went down very well. That was held again this year. It was meant to be in the summer, but we had to move it until the autumn. It was a two-day event. One day was in the public domain, and one day was classified. And again, very good attendance of up to 200 people attended that event. International engagement is me being here. But also, I'll talk about the best practice guidance in a few moments' time. But space debris is a new area that we're looking at, or the role of PNT within the increasingly instance and increasing problems of space debris with the new mega constellations, and what is the role of PNT within that sector. So that's something that we'll be developing again. It came out through a presentation through a colleague of mine, Professor Marek Ziebart, at our annual general meeting of the Royal Institute of Navigation in the summer. And I think there's more work we need to be doing in that area. Next slide, please. So a key area of activity over the last year now has been this resilient PNT best practice guidelines. This, as I said, is funded by the UK PNT office. It's a phased approach. We're in the first phase of that, or just completed the first phase of that, and moving into the second phase. So as a rather general advice in the first place, what should be resilient PNT principles? Rather like some of the points that Matt was just talking about a few moments ago in Australia. So we can go out to vendors, we can go out to operators, CNI sectors, and provide simple, clear guidance and advice and a checklist. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Then developing those in far more detail, and eventually through the third phase, through the second half of next year, looking at specific critical national infrastructure and directly addressing their issues in terms of PNT resilience and dependence and how they should address those. So that will continue through the next year, as you can see. Next slide, please. So if we go back to that phase one. So we've produced these two documents, single-page documents. This is the printout of this. The link, the QR code at the bottom will allow you to download that, or I'll give you the actual link on a later slide. Single sheet, so we don't want to overload people, just a single sheet that people can look at and pick out key stages to trying to achieve PNT resilience in CNI in particular. So a short introduction, and then that's those three steps of prepare, act, and recover from any instance of PNT resilience. So how should people start assessing that? Well, the next slide, please, shows the first part of the second leaflet, which has basically a simple 10-step questionnaire. So the idea of this is that an informed person can actually talk to an operator, a CNI sector, and explain this and have a framework to step through this. There's very simple questions. Okay, does your organization maintain a list of all the systems, including suppliers, that connect to or rely on PNT? Simple yes, no's. And step down through this list, and you can see how the detail increases in terms of that and the responsiveness and what they would do if there was an incident. Next slide, please. And I won't read out every single question, but as I say, it fits on a single sheet. So a single sheet of guidance, a single sheet as a checklist that people can work through to try and get that initial assessment. You will see this is quite general, but it has provided that first step, and as I say, the ongoing work then with this best practice guidelines will develop this more specifically for individual CNI sectors as we work through next year. And again, there's a link there on the bottom. And the final slide just ties it all together. I mentioned the RAN's new Resilient PNT portal. This is now live. and it is a way you can get those documents I've talked about, but it will be enhanced greatly over the next year as new documents and resources are formed and emerge. And again, you can get it either through the link on the bottom there or the QR code in the other corner. Okay, that completes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Comments? Frank?
Oh.
Frank and then Jeff.
So, suggestion, credit to John Betts. You talked about an SBAS capability with the satellite, and the suggestion is how about doing some kind of cooperative thing with the HARS system, which seems to be gathering some momentum, and making that data available over the internet, which may save you some money, and it's harder to jam the internet than it is to jam those satellite transmissions. So
yeah,
maybe use that as a way to do the PPP capability you talked about.
Indeed, there is, as many people may be aware, there was an extensive study which again was finally published last October on the space-based aspects of future PNT within the United Kingdom involving many possible solutions. So I agree with you. So I think this is an early stage in terms of that part of the work program, but it would seem completely to make sense to not only think about space-based delivery, which is more expensive, but also to look at the internet delivery of the corrections and the integrity information. So I'm sure many people may be aware that there has been a prototype operating as a space-based augmentation system for the United Kingdom, which has been operating for over 2 years now and broadcasting integrity information.
Jeff and then John.
I'm not sure exactly how to put this, Terry. The incredibly rich, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just about, yes.
Sorry. An incredibly rich content in all that's going on in the UK. I was particularly impressed with the UK version of this organization, the RIN Advisory Group, that you had a PERT chart, a tremendous number of activities. I guess the one question I had was when you talk about resilient PNT, I saw the questionnaire, and question number 5, which is the only one I really had a chance to read, was when you have a disruption, do you have workarounds? Do you have alternative PNT available? Yes or no? Who has ever been able to answer that question yes? And if so, what was the alternative? I mean, maybe this hasn't gone out yet, maybe it's just a work in progress, but I think of resilient PNT as PNT that's resilient, that is less vulnerable to disruption. The questionnaire seemed to be about what happens when you experience a disruption because PNT is inherently not resilient. Am I missing something? Is this just a semantic difference?
Okay, well, I'll make a couple of points, I think. First of all, this is a draft. It's phase 0 of the work, and a key message coming out of the Royal Institute of Navigation is please can we have your comments now this can be developed further. So that would be the first point. The second point, it's intentionally a very brief checklist, and as I said, the idea is it is accompanied by an expert who can talk through this. So it says very little on here. I appreciate that. And so the point of this is just to actually get that conversation going to explain in more detail.
John?
Jeff, I can give you an example. A timing receiver that's backed up by a rubidium clock. So I lose GNSS, and I flywheel on my clock for a number of days. That's one of the reasons why we ask to hear the government say how long should we expect a GPS outage to occur, that is a lack of signals from the satellites, because that tells a user what quality clock to buy for that application. But that's a simple example of that probably can be answered, that question can be answered in the affirmative by a lot of people who use timing receivers with clocks as backups. Terry, I had a question for you. And you know, obviously, I serve on the PTA subcommittee, and so I'm always looking for P and T and A. And I'm not sure I saw as much protect or toughen there in the thinking as I might have expected. Is there, how are you emphasizing all three of those aspects?
Okay, no, I don't think in this piece of work, no, that's not, it's really in terms of raising the awareness of the resilience and how they need to respond. It's not really talking about the toughen part. But if you go back to the framework plan, the 10-point framework plan, there are aspects in there in terms of improving and building more resilient infrastructure, but also components of that in terms of clocks and receivers as part of it. So that's perhaps where the toughen part comes in there.
How about interference detection and removal?
So again, part of that is in the framework plan, where the monitoring network, so the Ordnance Survey network was a cause type network in terms of geodetic positioning, but it has been developed because of the continuous nature of the monitoring that's taking place, and it has been enhanced to provide a nationwide interference monitoring. That's now feeding into the UK Space Office, as I said, and that will be providing those alerts, and if you like, and how far that goes in terms of the then removal of the interference is a different matter. That's not covered by that at the moment.
Terry, great presentation. So I had a question about the two one-pagers.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the kind of end state, the way you envision it. So this is for CNI operators, right? So
yep.
If I help manage a power grid, let's say, and I don't know anything about PNT, do I see the RIN or use the RIN as kind of almost like a consulting type of body, or how far does it go, right, when it comes to
Not necessarily the RIN. The RIN is doing this work on behalf of the UK PNT office, so, and funded by them. So that eventually there would be, I said, the idea is that when those discussions are taking place, once that initial contact has been made and the awareness has been risen, then it would be followed up with that expert. Where that expert support is coming from, I don't think is decided at the moment in terms of who that personnel will be.
Matt.
Yeah, just as a comment, Brian, and it's probably Terry as well. From an Australian perspective, the role of Home Affairs in Australia in this regard is basically the responsibility falls on the infrastructure operator, the sector operator. And so the approach being taken, which is why that fact sheet I mentioned is there, is to just have checklists, to make sure that they're informed about the issues, but ultimately it's their responsibility as the infrastructure operator to deal with that. So one of the approaches that's being used is the Home Affairs have been saying things like, do you treat PNT resilience as part of your cyber resilience? To get people thinking it's like a cyber problem, and you need to think of it like a cyber problem, and you need to have it in your risk plans. But ultimately the responsibility falls on the infrastructure operator, the sector operator. So it's kind of a coaxing and a pushing and a informing approach. And I suspect it's similar for you, Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
And this is another
Yeah, this is some excellent work, Terry. I noticed in one of your questions you had test as one of the things that you would look at. And one of the problems that many infrastructure providers have is, how do I know that I've got a good piece of equipment? And it sort of comes back to Brad's question, how do I identify a receiver that is competent and knows what to do? So, coming back to John's example of the atomic clock, very oftentimes you expose a GPS receiver to a spoofing signal and it drives off the atomic clock. It drives off the backup system. And so there's questions of, as a user, how do I select equipment that is going to respond appropriately when interference happens or spoofing? And also how it's able to, train fell off the track. So is that part of your remit?
obviously, I've shown you what is there from the PNTF. I think it would be as part of the later work of that. It's not on that directly. I think you point to it on the framework there. If we were to go back and go to that sort of Gantt chart I showed you for the activities of the advisory group, we did have that sort of standards work and, well, not only standards work, but the testing and to allow people to look at equipment and be able to test it and see what sort of guidelines there were there. So that was in the previous year's work program, and that will be continuing as well. It wasn't on the sheet I showed you there, but I think it's very much recognised that that's an important part of it, so people can know how to test to assess their the resilience or lack of resilience.
Well, just following up, I'd love to have a little stamp on the thing that says this one's been certified to level 1, level 2, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so that I can use this as a basis for picking equipment without having to understand how it works.
I didn't hear that second bit, sorry.
I'd like to be able to pick equipment without having to understand how it works. In other words, it's been tested to level 2 or level 1, something along those lines.
Yeah. No, it's an important part, and it's something we've raised in terms of the requirements for that, or the needs for that, yeah. Okay.
Was there one other on this side? Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it.
Okay, so I'll update on this, the progress of this, obviously at subsequent meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Dana's already headed to the podium. There we go.
Good morning. Most of you appreciate the fact that the R&T Foundation is a public benefit scientific and educational charity, and that we chose that method of organization because we're allowed to have commercial members, but at the same time we're prohibited for directly supporting their interest, and they are obligated to support our mission, which is to advocate for policies and systems that protect GPS and GNSS, satellites, signals, and users. Next slide, if I could. Legato, now that I have your attention, Legato has not gone away, although we don't hear a whole lot about it. You will remember back in 2020, the FCC decided to allow Legato to broadcast in frequencies adjacent to those of GPS and other GNSSs, and we had great concerns about that. The R&T Foundation filed a request for reconsideration with the FCC in 2020. We have not heard back from that. 6 other organizations did that as well. We did work with Senator Inhofe's office, though, and we got a requirement in law that the National Academy of Science should do a study and report on the impact of Legato operations on GPS. And of course, the National Academy of Sciences said it's not going to be good. There's going to be some adverse impact. So time rolls on. Legato has not actually implemented much capability, and in fact, recently they've decided to sue the government for damages because they allege that the government is preventing them from operating and benefiting from the free spectrum that they got from the FCC. So most recently, if you saw something in the press, it was undoubtedly that a court had decided that Legato could sue the government and proceed. The suit has not, the proceedings of this suit have not taken place, but the court has decided that this suit can go forward because, I guess, Jeff, you'll confirm that you really can't sue the government unless the government lets you, and so in this particular instance, the court said, yeah, you can sue the government. Also in October, the Legato reported to the FCC that, in fact, they had met some of the FCC's conditions in terms of establishing a mobile capability. There are some folks that question that assertion and whether or not the Legato provided enough information to the FCC to make that determination or to document that claim. And just to let you know that these situations continue to be ongoing. We are part of a coalition of folks that meet periodically to discuss the status of the Legato decision, implementation, and associated issues, and are monitoring and will likely be responding to things as they develop. So, has not gone away, even though you may not have heard a whole lot about it. Next slide, if you will. So one thing that we've also been looking at is the fact that there was really no analysis that we could find of what happened to air traffic during these two instances of disruption at major airports in 2022. In fact, Tim Murphy and Logan Scott brought it up to us, and we all decided to get a little cranky and say, well, somebody ought to do it. And so, next slide, the R&T Foundation worked with London Economics to take a look at the traffic patterns around Dallas, Fort Worth, and Denver during the period of disruption to see what the impact was. We thought this was an important thing to know. GPS is important, you disrupt it, what happened? Next slide. Well, as it turns out, they found several very important things. The first was that because VOR, DME, and ILS were there at both of these large locations, the noticeable or the measurable impact on aviation operations in the air were pretty much negligible. Pretty hard to detect anything. But they did point out that these kind of facilities are typically available at big airports, and they cautioned that government moves to reduce terrestrial navigation systems for aviation might want to be reconsidered in the light of these kinds of disruptions. Also, they said it was really important or is critical to continuing to be able to conduct flight operations that the ground was not impacted, so the interference is pointing up at the airplanes who had a backup capability. If the ground operations had been impacted, if the interference had been from a source that was elevated and ground operations, things like ground operations at the airport, passengers and crew and cargo and fuel being able to get to and from the airport, their assessment was that the situation would have been much different. It could have resulted in delays at the airports that could have rippled through the systems. One other thing that we found out after we issued the report, London Economics contacted all of the major airlines that were at both of these locations, and they said, no, everything's fine. Our statements in the press to the fact that we were unimpacted are our position. However, we also found that an RTCA meeting in Dallas, subsequent to the Dallas event, there was one airline that complained bitterly about the disruption and all the challenges they had and went through. So good reminder that big companies always tell you what they're thinking in the press or when you go and ask them questions. So next slide. Another thing we've been up to, as I think I briefly talked about this yesterday, we had the National Security Space Association write a paper for us on their view, essentially, of the leadership issue and the state of PNT in the nation. Mark Berkowitz was the primary author. It was reviewed by Doug Libero, who was former DASD for space at the Department of Defense. As I mentioned yesterday, it came out at just about the same time as the Admiral's letter to the two deputies. Interesting thing that they mention in their paper is the concept of GPS blackmail. The fact that prior to the invasion of Ukraine, when Russian troops were mustered along the border, Russia shot down one of their defunct satellites, and several days later, state media said that if NATO crossed their red line, they would shoot down all 32 GPS satellites and blind NATO. Subsequent to that, the administration here in the U.S. decided that they were not going to provide certain kinds of capabilities to Ukraine because they didn't want to provoke a Russian invasion. Now, whether or not those two issues or those two things were related or not is completely unknown, but they mentioned the possibility here in the National Security Space Association paper. Next slide, if you would. We also talked yesterday about the GPS spoofing report. Prior to that, there was a Eurocontrol tech directors meeting expressing concerns over the decades of planning that had gone into having the airspace system depend upon GPS and GNSS and GBAS, and speculating and wondering, well, what's next? We now know how vulnerable these signals are. What can we do next? A similar question was asked by the Ops Group in their GPS spoofing report. And so we decided to have some folks take a look at that. Next slide, if you would. So this is a report that I sent out to all of you and asked for your comments on. Thank you very much for those of you that read through it and advised on us and provided input. It's by Dr. Aquaria Seixas, who is formerly of DLR, the German Aerospace Center, and now at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, and Dr. Gary McGraw, formerly of Collins, now independent consultant, and who will be the next president of the Institute of Navigation. Next slide. As those of you that looked through the report found, they compared a number of different technologies, and they recommended that eDME, ELRN, and LDAX nav be strongly considered. Actually, all three of them be considered to be adopted into the aviation navigation suite to provide a more resilient combination of navigation sensors to ensure that air traffic is able to proceed unimpeded. I should have mentioned on the previous slide, so this study was focused around performance-based navigation, and for those of you not familiar with aviation, performance-based navigation is sort of the ideal, the state where aviation can proceed from point to point without having to go from nav aid to nav aid and operate the most efficiently, and the utility of the airspace is maximized. And I'm sure Tim will correct me afterwards if I got some of the subtleties wrong there. But yeah, so this is the chart and their bottom line recommendation. Other good things in the report, though, certainly acknowledging a number of associated issues with the way that GPS has been integrated into aircraft navigation systems. Next slide. So looking ahead for our particular organization, we are very concerned about the possibility of disruption of GPS from space-based assets. We have been in contact with some researchers that have told us that there is evidence that this has already taken place. It's kind of an extraordinary claim. We think that that is, deserves extraordinary evidence. So we're going to be continuing to look at that. And we're also thinking about looking at GPS interference as it impacts transatlantic operations and how that can be overcome. You may know that even if an aircraft overflies an area where GPS interference is prevalent, frequently it will come out of that area and its GPS will not recover. And in fact, the transit lanes across the Atlantic have been suffering a degree of reduced capability because of aircraft that do not have capability to use GPS and ADS-B, and so additional spacing and or lower flight levels are required, making this congested and highly valuable airspace and traffic slots less and less effective. Next slide. Yes, and so finally, as a nonprofit, we are required to, we are supported, as I mentioned, by all of our members. That's the only way we get by today. So I want to shout out to them and thank them very much. And to tell you that for those of you that are RNTF members, we are having our annual meeting today, right after this event. So we'll be in the Esplanade room. So get your lunch and join us there if you want to participate in our relatively informal conversation and an annual meeting that we are required to have by law. So, any questions and comments?
Just thanks for your continuing support for the events at our meetings, Dana, and your efforts. We really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Thanks for that briefing. And my briefing, which I guess is going to be next because David's not here, it'll be a kind of continuation of it in a moment. But I wanted to ask, your reference to, let me characterize it as kinetic warfare in space, where we're not talking about compromising a signal, we're talking about blowing up a satellite. Mm-hmm. You suggested that there could be a narrative about how our willingness to help Ukraine might have been influenced by our worry about the possibility of somebody taking out the constellation. This is maybe a question that needs to be discussed in a skiff, I don't know, but are you aware of any conversation about dealing with that level of threat?
I am not aware of any conversation about, other than what's been in the press about Russia wanting to put a kinetic atomic weapon, a nuclear weapon in space, which could affect any number of things. I will say, from my personal opinion in reading, I think that a kinetic attack on GPS and other satellites is, well, certainly on GPS in light of the fact that they have the nuclear warning capability on them. I think that kinetic attack would be difficult and unwise and overly provocative when it would be much easier and much effective to do something that can be reversed, like jamming or spoofing, that kind of thing. Just even the threat of jamming or spoofing would likely be more effective than the threat of a kinetic attack, but that's just me. So.
Yeah, generally above our pay grade, but there is infrastructure out there too. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much.
You did your own intro. Jeff Shane.
Thank you. As you may know, one of my responsibilities on the board is to represent IATA. IATA is the International Air Transport Association. Just a word about the organization. It's a trade association of a lot of the world's airlines, about 330, I think at last count. There are many more airlines than that in the world, but those 330 represent about 85% of the air traffic, of the flying that goes on in the world. It's a trade association for sure, but it's multifaceted, and it has a lot of different parts that are focused on different aspects of the business, including the aspect of the business that we're talking about here. So you will have detected, I suspect, from what you've just heard from Dana, that aviation has been serving involuntarily as a kind of canary in the coal mine. I'll come to think of it, I don't think any canary in the coal mine does it voluntarily. So there, but if we could have the first slide, please. Last spring, I introduced to you IATA's GNSS RFI, which means radio frequency interference. That's sort of the terminology that IATA and the aviation industry likes to use. The safety risk assessment. The one I talked about last spring was the 3rd edition. They have since come out with a 4th edition, and the 4th edition takes us through the first half of 2024. Could I have the next slide? This is the big news. 18.4 million flights, more than 580,000 loss of signal reports. Now, if that's between August of 2021 and June of 2024. If that statistic doesn't get your attention, take a gander at the next slide, if you will. So that'll show you the number of incidents in terms of incidents per 1,000 flights. And you'll see that from 2023 to 2024, and remember this is only going through the first half of 2024, the number of incidents per 1,000 flights went from 30.8 to 50.8. And I'll do the math for you, that's a 65% increase, just in less than a year. I asked IATA whether they had any more recent data since the middle of 2024. They did not. But my guess is that if that trend continues, it probably would be higher than 50.8 today. Next slide. Oh, go back one. Forgive me. But apart from the incidence of GNSS disruption, take a look at the bar on the left, 2021. If you're wondering what the impact of the pandemic was on aviation, I think this demonstrates it pretty graphically. It was devastating. Okay, next slide, please. Because aviation is encountering so many of these things, and because there are systems on board that note the disruption automatically, and because IATA can collect those reports automatically, IATA produces a lot of heat maps. And this is the 2022 map. You'll see that obviously there's a hot spot in the Middle East, but the incidents are not by any means reserved to one part of the world. They are all over the place. Take a look at 2023. Next slide. And you can take a look at 2024, at least up through the first half. You can see graphically the increase. Again, these are not human reports. These are reports that are generated automatically by systems on the aircraft, so there's no subjectivity to them. It's a pretty worrisome picture. Next slide. This is a simple slide. Just take a look at the consequences that IATA predicts for potential consequences of these incidents. Mid-air collisions, controlled flight into terrain, which is it's a crash into the ground, and runway excursions where the aircraft just doesn't know where it is on the runway and therefore overshoots. Next slide. So IATA tries mightily to socialize the information that it gets from the industry. The most recent and most important of the meetings that it's attended was the Air Navigation Conference of ICAO in Montreal, August and September of this year. Next slide. They submitted some working papers just talking about all that I've been showing you and that Dana was talking about. And those working papers were embraced pretty well by the assembled delegates. The next slide, producing some ICAO resolutions. It's interesting to me that in the year of our Lord 2024, ICAO is recommending that conventional navigation aids be retained by governments. We thought with the advent of GNSS, GPS, ADS-B, which is how aviation uses GPS, it might be possible to decommission some of those conventional navigation aids. Now what we're hearing from the global organization that sets standards for aviation, ICAO in Montreal, states should maintain those conventional navigation aids, and that's just an acknowledgement that we have a very vulnerable GNSS signal. Make aircraft systems more resilient. It's a wordy slide. I apologize for that. I try to highlight the important concepts. Make sure that there's guidance on detecting GNSS jamming or spoofing, and review the aircraft minimum equipage lists. That's for states. That's for civil aviation organizations that belong to governments. The next slide is a recommendation to ICAO itself. Assess the impact of GNSS interference, develop standardized implementation ideas for GNSS radio frequency interference, maintain those conventional navigation aids and try to optimize them, develop an information exchange, and again, talk about minimum aircraft equipment lists. Next slide. There are other collaborative activities that IATA has been engaged in, a webinar that it did with CONSO, which is the Civil Aviation Navigation Services Organization. That's an association of air traffic management organizations from around the world. They did a workshop with the European Aviation Safety Agency. There's another one coming up early next year. And then finally, in the margins of that aviation navigation conference that I spoke about before, ICAO does what they call Sky Talks. These are videos where experts present information on particular topics. GNSS RFI was one of those topics. I looked at the Sky Talks episode on GNSS RFI and was surprised to discover our friend Tim Murphy being the first presenter. And I will tell you without any embarrassment that Tim Murphy did a much better job of telling you about the problem that I've just done. He was paired with both Boeing and Airbus, who talked, I thought, quite powerfully about the problem of GNSS radio frequency interference. The point is that GNSS is not just a way for the airplane to figure out where it is in the sky. It's a much more powerful system than that for avionics. It has to do with collision warning systems. It has to do with ground proximity warning systems. The displays on the aircraft. Tim can certainly do a much more robust job than I'm doing in describing to you how GNSS signals are essential to the conduct of civil aviation today, all of which systems are at risk. So I personally wonder, and this will be my last point, whether states are doing more than talking about it. I mean, there's a tremendous amount we've been hearing about conferences and all of the presentations this morning. My head is awash in information about conferences, people talking to people. These are people basically who all agree already on what they're talking about. They're just kind of working themselves up. I think that's what IATA is left doing at ICAO. And ICAO produces a bunch of recommendations that says, be aware of the problem. I'm wondering when somebody's going to start to try to solve the problem. And that's, of course, what we're sitting here talking about. I don't mean to be discouraging, but it's very important that there be awareness, that airlines certainly be aware, and fortunately there is redundancy in the aircraft. Thus far, we haven't had too many problems as a result of all that interference, but one wonders how much longer we can assume that there won't be a bigger problem at some point. So I'm done. Brad.
It always troubles me when I hear these talks because the problem is very real. But on the other hand, the main way of fixing it is not being employed because of ITAR. And my guess is if you had a jam-resistant, we can go into, oh God, ain't it awful, it's going to take another 8 inches in the diameter of the antenna, or ain't it awful, someone's going to have to retrofit. Putting all that aside for a minute, the existence proofs for commercial manufacturable equipment aren't available because of ITAR. And people will talk about everything except the toughening side in any depth. And it bothers me that we have data like you've shown, yet we don't have the complementary data that was just brought up again, I think, a few minutes ago, on which of the sets did not get affected and why didn't they? To me, in part, certainly having augmentations is part of our strategy. But what really bothers me is we don't hear the toughening side of the talk. Everyone waves their hands about resilience and immediately goes to augmentation. That's good. I believe in having both a left and a right leg. I think both are important. But what just frosts me is the toughening. I talked to the military rep here yesterday, and he said, well, ain't it awful? It takes quite a bit of room for those antennas. Well, yeah, and do you want to carry out your mission or not? And in this case, to me, if that solution were available and prevalent, my guess is the cost of those antennas would go down. Because if you go to Skylink, they have equivalent antennas at a much higher frequency, and they have, what, 500 or 100 of those elements? And we're just talking 20. So my little speech is a plea to start to get some balance back into this discussion, because frankly, putting an antenna in is going to be a lot simpler than completely re-equipping with some augmented system that requires whole new boxes. So, end of speech. Obviously, you're not the messenger I'm going to shoot, but I appreciate your good remarks, because they have obviously hauled out the very vitriolic comments that I tend to make.
Relevant to all of this, of course, is the slide that Dana put up about the study that's being done with the colored solutions. My question to you, Dana, is whether you know of any effort to insinuate the results of that study into the FAA, and whether the FAA has taken up some of the ideas that the study produced, because it looks as though there are solutions.
Thanks, Jeff. Am I coming through?
Yeah.
Okay, so we haven't had any reaction from the FAA or any government organization on the London economic study about Dallas and Denver. The second one, we were waiting to publish formally until after this event, because we wanted to get the benefit, which we have had, of the experts here in this room. So that'll be coming out, and I'm hoping that the two smart people that put it together will get invited to ICAO conferences and that sort of thing, to be able to talk about what they found. If for no other reason than to just start the discussion, because I don't, other than the questions being asked that I referenced, I don't know of any discussions along those lines. I mean, people are talking about toughening receivers. You're talking about adding Galileo and Beidou into aircraft cockpits or nav systems. But I don't know of any other conversations. They may be going on in government, but I haven't heard of them.
Okay, well, this is probably not the place to have this conversation at much greater length, but my view is waiting to be invited to brief the FAA is probably a fool's errand. I think it's going to take a little bit more aggressive outreach than that, and perhaps get yourself invited. If I can be of assistance with the FAA, I'm certainly happy to, because I think we really, I don't mean to belittle anyone in the FAA. There are undoubtedly people in the rank and file that are taking this very seriously and are thinking about it. Whether they're able to get this issue pushed up the line is always the problem in a large, complex organization. So we need to really think about ways and means of ensuring that this information, the possibilities that we see, are at least socialized with the people that are in a position to make a difference. I think I'm done.
Jeff, I added a position to pass any kind of briefing papers to the landing teams for FAA for the transition.
I'm not hearing, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, the speaker's not pointed at you. I guess we figured that out. Is IATA in a position to provide a briefing paper to the landing teams with the transition teams for DOT and FAA, if you had the opportunity?
I do not know the answer to that. My guess is the answer is no. IATA is an international organization. It's based in Montreal. It's not a U.S. agency. It's not a U.S. organization. So it may well be that they're going to be sharing stuff with the incoming aviation people, but whether they're actually reaching out to the incoming administration at large with a transition paper, I just don't know.
Okay, we're prepared to engage DOT on their landing team. If you want to talk offline, I'll see if there's a channel where the information could be provided. We can talk offline.
This is really a question for the room, not necessarily for you, Jeff, but isn't part of the answer here improvements in redundant inertial platforms? I mean, we've got much better gyros than we've had in the past, so why aren't we working that part of the problem too? I didn't see anything in the IATA report that indicated that was part of the solution.
Tim's got your answer. Yeah, can I add on to that? Because that was a question I was going to ask. Part of your earlier slides, you said the recommendation to maintain navigational aids. I'm wondering if that shouldn't be replaced with alternate sources of PNT, which gets to the issue of how do you do resiliency and redundancy. Just a thought where just reverting back to what we got in case we need it may not be enough. That was the only issue.
So I just want to respond to your, oh, do you mind?
Go ahead.
To your question. Inertial integration has been part of the solution since the earliest days of GPS being put on air transport airplanes. We've never put a GPS receiver on and not integrated it with inertial in the FM or somewhere. And frankly, interference is not new, and it really didn't become the crisis that it is now until we started to see a lot of spoofing, because we coast through short outages of GPS because of inertial. And our inertial integrations have gotten more and more sophisticated. So the newer airplanes like the 87 and the 777X do tightly coupled GPS inertials, and they work great for coasting through interference, but they have a tendency to get corrupted if they're spoofed, because we didn't write in the right algorithms, because we didn't expect this spoofing to become chronic like this. So that's all being reworked at this point. And I just want to make this broader point that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye here, because companies like mine and Airbus, and they're off working this problem really hard, but we're not doing it in a big public way, partly because this is like a cybersecurity issue, and we're prohibited from talking about the vulnerabilities of airplanes, and we're not going to ever divulge the really low-level details of what we've done to address this stuff, because that's just instructing the next generation of the attackers on what to do.
It's heartening to hear that that's being worked. I wondered if we were getting lazy because we were counting on GPS availability, and so you didn't worry as much about gyro drift because you were getting re-vectored every time, so every second.
Hey Jeff, I had a quick answer from the chair. It's okay. So when you had the stats on RFIs, those are just RFI incidents. Is there any secondary information that links those to an actual event or causation that had some kind of consequences that might be instructive in describing the problem further? A mishap or an accident associated with it?
I think because of the redundancy that we've seen that Dana talked about at DFW, we've been pretty lucky thus far.
Okay, all right. And the final thing, I'm just going to make a comment because I'm going to have to do some more research on it myself. Bear with me here. You may recall back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a hijacking of a vessel called the Achille Lauro in the Mediterranean. And there was a gentleman named Leon Kleinhofer who was actually thrown over the side in a wheelchair by terrorists. As a result of that action, there was a convention passed by the United Nations, and the suppression of unlawful acts against navigation. And I'm wondering if there isn't some kind of an analogy for the growing trend of what's going on with jamming, spoofing, and so forth. Because we talked earlier about what do you do about detection and mitigation. And sooner or later, we're going to have some kind of a system to respond. And how do you classify that in terms of behavior? Is it a civil penalty? Is it a legal thing? And I think there's a line to be followed here about how we're going to characterize these actions in the future. What do we think about them as basically as a global community? Because we know there are customary laws that transcend national laws that are generally accepted. You know, piracy is illegal no matter where you go. It doesn't matter which flag you're flying or what country you're involved in. And I think there's probably a discussion to be having how we might move this concept forward. Not looking for an answer, but I just wanted to share the thought more than anything else. Yeah, John?
Well, a few things. First of all, just to respond to you, Admiral, unlike throwing a passenger overboard, these things are being done for our nation's defense. And so I think there's a different rationale there that's going to be more difficult to make illegal.
Well, it's attribution and the rationale, yeah,
right.
Yeah, which starts to get similar to cyber at that point.
So I had a couple other comments. First of all, to follow up on what Brad said, I asked the aviation experts over here if ITAR restrictions were removed tomorrow and out of magic a manufacturer said, here's an anti-jam antenna system. Is that ready to be put on aircraft, or is there the typical certification process that needs to go through? And does certification paperwork, do you have to start from the scratch? And should that be going on in parallel with removing the ITAR restriction instead of doing things in serial?
Yeah, there's a lot of regulatory stuff to work through. There's no certification basis, there's no TSO, there's no advisory circular, and you know, and again, the FAA is aware of that and talking about it and stimulating work to happen in RTCA to try to lay all that groundwork. Okay. So even if the ITAR is changed next month or whenever we were told it might happen, it's still years away before we'll see a part.
So things are working in parallel instead of in series?
Yeah, there's I guess I can divulge that, you know, we're having a lot of discussions internally about how we would certify something like this, and what kind of a program would we need to, you know, ensure that we could stand behind. It's not going to, that system itself wouldn't corrupt the GPS somehow in a jamming environment, causing errors that are intolerable to whatever operation we're doing, and that's no mean feat.
Yeah.
So.
If I could just hazard an uneducated guess, I think that if there were intentional interference through jamming or spoofing with an international flight or even a domestic flight, it would be a violation of existing international law. The question is identifying the actor and proving cause and effect. But I think the law is there. I don't think we need any new instruments. I think we just need better technology.
I would just make one note on the SUA convention that I mentioned earlier. That was contingent on the states that were signing on to the convention to pass domestic legislation that would allow them to prosecute. After the Maersk, Alabama case, we tried to prosecute the pirates, and we brought the ship into, I think it was Mombasa, but they had not passed implementing legislation, so we ultimately sent a team over and brought those folks back to the United States and prosecute them there, because there had to be an implementing state that had a domestic law that could be enforced, just for what it's worth.
So, yes, sir. So last year this time, ITU affirmed that it's against international telecommunications regulations to interfere with radio navigation signals. And then it said, unless, of course, you're doing it for national security. I'm not sure why a nation state would intentionally do it, except for, of course, tests, which are allowed. But I'm not sure why a nation state would otherwise do it if it wasn't for national security. Problem is that there was no stipulation that, you know, it can't go beyond your borders, or you know, that sort of thing. It's just left wide open, which really leaves the floodgates wide open, I guess.
Anything else?
Yes, sir. So, per your earlier instructions, what I did was put together some text that basically was a proposed finding from the advisory board in response to the briefing we received from SHAFA about the International Committee on GNSS. So if, Sarah, you could put that up. And what we're doing now is we've already put up the transition paper. We've put up Jade's recommendation. We've talked about the HARS paper. You know, it's important for transparency that everything that we intend to include in the transition paper is publicly available, so that's part of this process. So this is kind of the last piece. This is on behalf of the board. So please read through it. I've circulated it via email, received some comments. And then, Admiral, you will have the action as our chair to see if we have full support, consensus, or any modifications.
So I might suggest.
Dana,
that,
you have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, yes, sir. I might suggest that on the attachment, just as a matter of format, we might want to have little subheads for categories of recommendations.
Yeah, this is just
that sort of thing. But yeah,
we'll organize it. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to disrupt here, but could we maybe go back to the previous topic here on the.
Oh, sure.
I'm just reflecting on some of these things coming out, and I had a chance to talk with Tim in a sidebar a bit. It seems that we're going through a real qualitative shift in this problem. I mean, I thought the charts that Jeff showed here, they're really, they're impactful in terms of the percentage of disruption that occurs, the concentrations, the rest. The other thing I'm struck with is that this whole idea of creating impediments in being able to employ these antenna technologies, it is not just a U.S. or a Boeing problem. What's happened now is it's created a chill across the entire aviation industry, both in terms of the providers. Apparently, Airbus is not offering anything here. I suspect Bombardier. I mean, in effect, our inability to freely and openly be able to incorporate these technologies has created a bit of a crisis, if you will, across the entire aviation industry. And those that now are suffering the consequences, obviously it's the public, but you've now got a finite number of airlines around the world that are experiencing these problems. And I'm just wondering, is there something that we perhaps would want to note at this point in time, that while this has been a continuing problem, this isn't just a U.S. and ITAR or whatever else. This has caused a complete chill across this critical industry, and it's impacting things worldwide. And so that it's no longer just, as I say, a interdepartmental bureaucratic set of debates and discussion. This whole thing has really risen to a different level. And to try to energize some of these voices like IATA, and I know that there's airline groups and whatever else, can that be brought to bear saying, this now, we are past the time that this has got to get addressed, or our civil aviation on a global basis is going to be very, very impacted, whether that be economically or, God forbid, actual incidents and accidents that are caused by it.
Well said. Is there something else we can add to what we've already done, or make a statement, or is there a narrative or verbiage?
So I come back to Tim. I mean, some of the discussion we had about kind of the dynamics in the industry that, yeah, there's solutions and people are working on it. But again, it's not just Boeing. It's probably the same going on. The trouble is, it's caused such a chill that it seems as though everybody's just sort of admiring the problem, if you will, rather than understanding how this is going asymptotic to a real crisis in international civil aviation.
So I'm a big fan of SERPAs. I am, but it's not the only solution. Of course. And there's a lot of work going on right now to harden equipment in other ways that will address a lot of the problem in terms of our near-term goal is to turn all this spoofing stuff that we're experiencing into simple denials of service and make it not so operationally disruptive.
Right.
Our long-term goal is to try to play through it all and maintain GPS. And SERPAs are more about that, about the long-term playthrough. So there is a lot of activity going on to harden receivers, and the move towards L5 is an important step in that. That's going to help a lot. There's a lot of airplane level integration stuff that's going on because we're addressing, false TCAS or false enhanced ground prox alerts and all these things. So SERPAs are not some magic bullet that, oh gosh, if we just had those today, we'd put it on the airplane and it would solve all our problems, because it probably wouldn't. There are some of these airplane integration issues that need to get fixed anyway. And
so let me pull the thread a little bit further here, and then we start bumping into sort of defense and potentially sensitive dialogue. But there's huge efforts going on right now to harden military aviation against these problem sets. And my understanding is the physics is still the same. And so the question is there something to state in terms of what steps are being taken to harden national security employment of this really has proven the efficacy, or that this is a critical enabler, or whatever else. So we can add something more to it, and we're just awaiting to hear what comes out of the State Department. As we even heard, Brad, I mean, even if it gets off the ITAR list, it's still going to be on the EAR. And then the question is, well, how the heck is that going to get operated? So this is just a continuing process that has not yet had to confront how profound this is. It isn't just about the bureaucratics of how many elements. I mean, you're starting to see a real rise in impact on a global basis.
Yeah, and beyond ITAR and EAR, then you get moved to a classification level, completely separates it.
Well, but the process, though, that it still has to go through, and I know there's different presumptions under DOC and the rest of that, but we still don't know how the heck they would go about treating it.
The ITAR business is simply an impediment to what is a very complex process. And no one, I don't understand it as well as Tim, but I understand it pretty well. And what I am suggesting, and I hear you suggesting, is, well, let's pull as many impediments out of the way and then let the system work. We still have to go through RTCA. We still have to get detailed instructions, retrofitting or new equipment, altogether different problems. In the case of the military, my fondest hope is there's lots going on I don't know about. And I got the impression in talking yesterday to Dell that that is probably true. So but on the commercial side, that's not in his job jar. It's kind of in ours. And to the extent we've jawboned it, at least I personally have jawboned it too much, probably, but I think getting the impediment out of the way, I was told is our State Department gent still here?
Jeff Auerbach?
Jeff? Yeah. Did you tell me I'm going to hear next week? I'm hopeful. Yeah, okay. That's the best I can get out of them right now, but that's better than 2 years ago when they said it was going to be next month. Think about it. All right. So the directional antenna can be enormously helpful, but if you go into the presentation that I really did on this, which was like a year and a half ago, it's part of a total integrated solution that definitely involves inertials. It involves the deep integration, not the trivial side-by-side integration, and a bunch of other stuff. But the thing is, this particular aspect of that combination solution is denied right now effectively to the civilians. We can't even really start down the path in a serious way.
And I hate to say, I suspect it becomes an excuse also to say, well, we got to wait, or something, there's an impediment out there, and ultimately it's going to come, well, that's going to cost us money, and that's going to be a financial drag. Somehow this has got to move to the point of saying this is got to be the way that these problems are dealt with on a global basis. Everybody's experienced it, either manufacturers, airlines, or the rest, or else there's going to continue to be a series of, excuses as to why we can't come to grips with this until there's a crisis.
I personally think we're very fortunate that we have Tim where he is, because he has a broader view of what is going on, and I've encouraged him to never retire.
Oh, shucks.
There's something that's come out of this that I don't think we've hit head on yet. We see all these reports about spoofing and jamming, and the natural tendency is, GPS and GNSS is no good, we've got to go to plan B or plan C. because the aviation industry, because either the technology isn't possible or the aviation industry isn't paying attention. And what we've heard this morning, even though Tim can't get into the details, is that neither of those things is true, that technology is there to turn spoofing events into denial of service events, which inertials allow you to coast through, and that it's being worked even though it's not a good idea to tell the details of how it's being worked. So the question is there something that either the aviation industry or this board can do to provide that perspective that the sky is not falling and that there are solutions underway? And is there anything that can be said about when those solutions might be available?
They'll be introduced incrementally over the next 4 or 5 years. But, I think one of our first deliverables is next year for a software part role on a particular receiver. But we have several part numbers of receivers, so that's just one of a bunch. They've all got to get fixed. And then, enhanced ground procs probably needs a software update. That's probably a 2-year development with a certification associated with it. So there's not going to be a big bang, all of a sudden the problem is solved, because the problem is so multidimensional and it impacts different aircraft models differently because they've all integrated GPS in a unique way and used it for many, many things across the airplane.
But my point is that story's not out there today, even among the experts in this room, never mind the more general public. Is there anything that can be done to get that story out?
I think in part the issue is there anything that should be done. I'm suddenly sensitive to what Tim just said, that you don't want to give hostile forces a leg up on sort of expanding or trying to take it to the next step. And I would defer to Tim in terms of how much publicity you want to give, but I think the fact that he is working it, I would hope you're gathering statistics on which particular sets are vulnerable in which way, that of course would be proprietary and you could not share that with us. But I would be very happy if you shared it with your own people, which I assume is happening.
So now, putting my Boeing hat on, we have monthly meetings with operators where we go through all this stuff in detail, but because we'll tell them what they need to know to operate the airplane safely in the airspace, given what we know about it. We don't have public meetings otherwise to inform the general public because we don't think they need to know. And again, it's sensitive information because it talks about vulnerabilities, and the more we educate the general public about the vulnerabilities, the more the bad guys can evolve faster than we can field protections. So it becomes kind of a vicious cycle because there is a tendency to admire the problem because you see all these reports, and then the average person who's not in the heart of it says, well, nothing seems to be happening, so let's stand up another group to, mull over the problem. And in the meantime, it is being addressed, but, you just
Matt,
don't
did
know
you have a
about it.
comment?
Well, I just wanted to make, a general comment to agree with John's point about the sky is falling, and I think that applies across all, not just aviation, all applications. There is that, and we do need to guard against that. And a way I tend to think about it is with cyber, we didn't go, oh, everyone's got to abandon the internet. We've all got to get off the internet. No, we've hardened, right, and for a country like Australia to say we're not going to use GNSS will put us back 50 years. So that we've got to make it work somehow with hardening. Yes, we need other technologies, blah, blah, blah. But just to say the sky is falling and stop using GNSS, which is a story that we're seeing and hearing from different sectors. I think I totally agree with John that we need to somehow get that message tempered or something.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about revealing any sensitive information. I just think it's a good story that the issues are being worked and there are solutions that are going to start being fielded, and it's going to be an incremental process. If that's able to be said in some way, I think that would be really, really good news, compared to a lot of the reports that are out there.
I like that because it balances a little bit. I think there's people chafing at the lack of balance, and without going into details, just saying there are people working very, very hard on this problem, and they are in the right place. And there are solutions. Incidentally, you may not have picked up on this, is completely orthogonal. There is right now a tsunami warning for the San Francisco area. I don't know if you're going up to San Francisco.
Yes.
It was just an orthogonal comment.
I've heard that word about 20 times this week.
No, this is real tsunami warning.
No, I understand. I remember Groucho Marx, the bird used to come down with a word.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, it's orthogonal this week. Yeah. I know John likes it a lot.
I just think it would have been a worse scenario if it was LA.
Yeah. Just on that, I'm getting messages. The people with phones, with smartphones in the Bay Area, check with your friends. There's earthquake warnings built into the phones now. You actually can get a few second head start on the earthquake if you're a few kilometers away. And GPS is right in the middle of that, of course. So that's just, people are pinging me. They're getting these messages.
Now that we've dispensed with our gallows humor, going back to the resolution that's up there, I had one issue, JJ. I don't think it needs to be included in the transition paper. It's just a standalone statement.
Okay, yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Sure. And just
that'll cloud what we're trying. I just make it a standalone statement.
And just to make it easier on everyone, just real quick. So we all have been working GPS for many years. Space sector is still emerging, still new, right? It's a new use. It's a new application in a lot of ways. Let me just read the text, and I just want to go around and make sure everyone's okay with it. The National Space-Based PNT Advisory Board has received and deliberated upon upon a presentation on the work being done within the International Committee on GNSS. We find that the work presented reflects a unique and substantially valuable opportunity to ensure GNSS providers continue to build out system resilience services. Further, this activity will optimize operations and science in the space domain. As such, the PNT Board fully supports and endorses such ICG efforts to ensure continued interoperability amongst service providers under the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Are there any concerns?
I think what's written there is great, but could this be turned into a recommendation if we said, and therefore the U.S. should support vigorous participation at ICG, or ensure that funding is available to adequately support ICG, or show leadership at ICG, or something like that? Turn it from just, this is just a finding. It says, we reviewed it, it's great, and we love it. And I thought our job was to try to...
So you're proposing we had a final sentence saying the board urges that the United States, and whatever you want to say after that. You want to write it and give it to us?
You want to strengthen it. You simply want to make it from a finding to a recommendation.
Make
I got
an
no
actual
problem.
recommendation that we, the United States, take ICG seriously. And
it was supposed to have been a recommendation. That's the reason I raised the issue. It's not something to do for the transition paper. It's a finding of the board. So
okay.
Yeah, we would change it.
Okay.
Okay, so I will tweak the text just like we're polishing the rest of everything that has been presented. But going around the table, are there any other thoughts? Do we have full concurrence on that?
Without objection.
I mentioned that I had those dot points just to summarize what came out of the session yesterday for the International Subcommittee.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, JJ, you were going to other issues? Oh, okay, sorry.
Go ahead
Okay.
again.
So I mentioned that earlier. I've written just some dot points to summarise what came out of the gold standard discussion yesterday, and therefore just to get them on the record in terms of, and I can send them to AJ as well.
Okay.
But just for the board members, the actions would be: firstly, tweak the summary tables from Brad and John as presented by Brad, and those tweaked versions available early in the new year. Next, develop the draft of the overall report with tables above to act as an executive summary, and with detailed sections structured according to the headings sent to the system provider. So they were those headings we were using that were in the booklet. So I was going to do that first draft and then work with the committee to develop the draft to be available before the next meeting. And then in parallel, continue to work with JJ on securing official presentations on Galileo and Beidou at our next meeting.
That's fine. Can you go ahead and provide that to JJ? And I apologize. I was focusing on this. You went to a different topic, and I just proved I'm about ready to be 76. I apologize. Are we completed our list of things to do?
That is everything that we had on our list. Up to you, sir, if you want to do a quick round robin farewell until the spring.
We'll start this way. Anything?
Yeah, I think there's a couple more recognitions we should make, Admiral. It's amazing to me that we all throw our slides over the wall and somehow they get magically displayed just the right way at the right time. So I think we should really thank Sarah Salim and her team over here for making these presentations seamless. And not many people realize it, but in the weeks that follow this, there's a couple people who put together the transcript of this meeting, and it's amazingly accurate and amazingly useful. So thank you to AJ and Nicole for all the work that you do. That's it for me.
Thanks, John. Over to here, starting with Russ going forward.
Yeah, I think it's been a great meeting. Really appreciate the work and the progress. Look forward to how things sort out with the new administration, and hopefully in the spring we'll really have a good idea of what the future direction is. So I look forward to seeing all you again.
Thanks, Russ.
So I'm just real happy with the progress we're making with the HARS. The National Geodetic Survey is really the agency for this, and so I'm glad that they're stepping up and moving forward, and hopefully we can get this put into action.
Thanks. Jay, just a reminder, make sure we contact me after about the National Academies, as we discussed just later on. Terry?
No, I've got nothing else to add.
I guess the only question I'd raise is, have we discussed where the next meeting would be?
Well, we'll hit that in a minute, yeah. Anything else?
I have nothing else to add, but I will second the notion. I think this was a very interesting and productive meeting. Well done.
Concur.
Before we get to admin remarks and what's happening next, just let me add my thanks to the staffs that are ring the building here. You know, when I talk about myself and my colleagues, guys like Brad and everybody else, I keep talking about those two guys on the balcony of the Muppet Show. You're dealing with a whole room full of them, okay? So thank you for your patience and dealing with us and everything else. We really appreciate it. So we're moving into a little area of uncertainty. Thanks for letting me nail down some stuff here. I am working some side issues, I will tell you right now. I'm in touch with the National Security Council. I'm going to try and get some clarity on landing teams and how we might transmit this stuff in the most effective way possible. I'm going to talk with Brad offline. We have from time to time acted in our individual capacity regarding some thought pieces and op-eds and all that kind of stuff, and there may be some opportunities for us to frame some of these issues going forward. I certainly, as the chair, have in the past been unencumbered on talking about this, and I may be doing it in the future. I just not sure how I got all my thoughts together, but I will agree with everybody else. The topics raised and the ability for me to learn and understand has been terrific in this time. I really appreciate that. So regarding next meetings, I'll let JJ amplify a little bit, but at this point, obviously there's going to be a change of administrations. There'll be a new NASA administrator. His name was announced today, subject to confirmation. I think the general theory is it's going to be somewhere in the DC area, somewhere in late May-ish, early June-ish. The rest of it to be determined, but for general planning purposes, I think that's kind of what we're shooting at. And JJ, any amplifying comments?
No, I think you covered it well, Admiral. We all agree that DC's the place. I think it's going to be the time too, because hopefully we'll get some of our new leaders in place by then. And can't thank everyone enough. NASA is very proud to host this. I personally am honored to be able to work with all of you as long as I have. Leisha, I can't tell you how much we're all going to miss you. Thank you, Dr. Betts, for bringing up again the great support and staff work of AJ, Nicole, and Sarah and others. That's all I have, sir. Thank you.
Could we pencil in a period when this might happen? A lot of us end up with schedules that can easily get impacted, but if I could take, say, even a 2-week period of penciling in, and this is obviously subject to change, but nonetheless as a starting point.
I'd throw out after Memorial Day, first 2 weeks of June.
First 2 weeks of June?
I like June. Leisha won't be here, so she won't say anything, but we all know that there's a lot of commencement activity in the May timeframe. But if we go into June, hopefully we're just beating that and it's not getting too hot yet. So if everyone agrees, we'll aim for the beginning of June, DC area.
Okay.
I just want to point out the Joint Navigation Conference is always that first week, let me tell you.
The first week, okay.
But that date has already been selected, right?
Right.
Do you recall
So
what is it?
I'm pulling it up. 2nd to the 5th. Thank you.
Is that going to be in San Diego again?
No, it's going to be in the Cincinnati.
Oh, okay.
So it sounds like, and I like to go to that JNC, it's perhaps the most informative of all the conferences because it's partially classified and it's American citizens only. So it sounds like it's between the 9th and the 21st of June is the penciled in date. Is that right?
Start with the working, make it the working assumption and we'll refine it.
Let me just ask Jeff Auerbach, do we know or Shafa, the ICG intercessional session?
In June?
Yes.
It's end of the month.
End of June, okay. So Dr. Parkinson, I think you gave us our window right there.
Okay. 10th to the 21st of June is the window. And
the location?
DC area.
In the DC area.
Yeah. Okay.
But more importantly, do we have a topic for the next meeting?
Well, we know part of it is to continue the international GNSS, right? We need to have Beidou and Galileo. I'm confident that after this meeting they will be there. And then what else, right? You're bringing up some really good, important points that we need to cover. So that's up to this entire group. What's the theme? And is there a subcommittee chair that wants to put their hand up and continue? Matt, perhaps you're around and you tag team with another subcommittee chair, but that's very helpful for me rather than trying to knock on everyone's door getting briefings.
We can work that offline. I would say let's try and get it done the next well, we got holidays coming up and everything else, but
January.
sometime after the transition, we're going to have to start dealing with the new administration. So we need to have some kind of rebuttable presumption that we can present as part of our briefings about what the first board's going to talk about. But I'd suggest we work it offline if that's
Just
all right.
one thought along those lines is you'll remember the last slide that the PTA subcommittee gave. We pointed out that there are a number of documents that have come out over the past few years, and it might be interesting and useful to parse those documents in terms of what actions are required, who's responsible for them, and where do we stand on accomplishing them. And being in the DC area, if some of that was done ahead of time, we could have speakers come in and talk about the progress towards meeting those objectives in the EO, in the SPD7, and so forth and so on. Just an option for us to consider.
Well, I think the EO and SPD7 are probably no-brainers with the new administration coming in, so I agree. Maybe the committee want to kind of prioritize them, triage them. What are the 4, 5, 6 most important? We can work that. Committee chairs, you got it? Okay. Like I said, the Muppet Show. All set?
You've got the gavel for the last
All right,
time?
thanks, folks. We're done.
And is there a lunch served now,
There
or?
is, yeah, it's point noon.